Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be talking about responding to active shooters, and we're going to be talking about the different kinds of active shooter response, or I guess it's more appropriate to say we're going to be comparing and contrasting some active shooter response. The reason we're doing this is because everybody knows that just a couple of weeks ago there was that school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, where a transgender person armed with, I believe it was like a 9mm carbine, entered the school and unfortunately killed 6 people, 3 children and 3 adults. The body camera footage was released of the officers responding to this incident, and the officers were rightly praised for handling this exceptionally. The response by the Nashville police officers was absolutely, I'm not going to say flawless because there's always room for improvement, right? But it was about as perfect as it gets. One of the things that I want to do today is I want to talk about the difference between the response in Nashville, the difference between this, and then the response in Uvalde, Texas. And then also I have a video that I published on my body camera channel from Columbus, Ohio, where officers responding to an active shooter outside of a bar. And the reason that I'm going to compare these 3 active shooter responses is because of what we said about Nashville. You know, everyone says, okay, the officers responded to Nashville. That's the way it's supposed to be done. That's how you handle these things. And I do agree. I agree 100% that the officers who responded to this incident in Nashville absolutely performed their job flawlessly. They did exactly what they were trained to do. It was the perfect response. But I want to urge a little bit of caution to people, because one of the reasons that their response was so perfect and flawless is because it played out just like a training scenario. When I go on a dispatch call with my buddies where it's like a high pressure situation and we're afraid that there might be a use of force or something might not go as planned, this, that, and the other thing, if everything goes perfectly, a lot of times once we get the guy in the car and we shut the door, we'll turn to each other and say, man, that was perfect. That was just like a training scenario. And the incident in Nashville was exactly that. The reason I want to kind of urge a little bit of caution is because situations aren't always going to play out like that. And it's not always the fault of the police officer. There's that little thing I want to put in there. The other thing is I want police officers to watch these things and say, okay, look, what happened in Nashville was absolutely perfect. The suspect was standing out in the open. The officers were able to engage them and take them out very, very quickly. But what's going to happen if it doesn't go that way? That is probably more important. Situations where it doesn't go that way are the situations where you learn more than when the response is absolutely perfect, and when the suspect does everything that the suspect is supposed to do based on your training. That is what happened in Uvalde, Texas, and to a certain degree, that's what happened in Columbus, Ohio. So what I want to do today is I want to walk through all 3 of these scenarios, talk about what the officers did, what the suspect did, and just kind of show that the more important thing isn't just showing up on scene, getting to scene, and being ready to take action. It's also, to a large degree, if things don't go absolutely perfect, how are you going to adjust and overcome that so that the most disastrous situation doesn't occur? I think that's how I want to look at this. And I want to remind the public that we are going to have more of these shootings in the future. It's just an inevitability. I'm sorry to say this. It's something that's going to happen no matter how many guns you ban, no matter how much mental health, how many mental health hospitals that you put in, no matter what you do with the psychiatric drugs, this, that, and the other thing. There are going to be situations like this, and police officers need to be prepared to deal with them. And the public also needs to be prepared to deal with the officer's response when it doesn't go exactly like it did in Nashville. So the first video that we're going to watch is going to be the officers responding to Nashville. I am only going to show the last 40 seconds or so. The part that you're going to see is when the officers hear gunshots, they determine where the gunshots are coming from, and they beeline straight towards the sound of that gunfire to take out their suspect. I mentioned it's the final 40 seconds because when the officers arrived on scene, I've got my notes here. They were on scene for about 1 minute before they entered the building. They were trying to figure out which door they were going to go into. They were talking to the teachers and staff. Very, very briefly and efficiently, they got a key. They entered the building. That took 1 minute. They then spent 2 minutes and 42 seconds in the first floor of the building searching for the suspect because there was no gunfire going on at that time. Some people might say, look, this is a piece of criticism that I would like to offer in this situation, is that while the officers were outside, they were told by a staff member that the suspect was upstairs. Why did they waste all their time downstairs? Well, when the officers responded and then spent that minute outside and then got that key and entered the building, the suspect had stopped firing. It's not that difficult to conceive a situation where the suspect was upstairs, saw the police officers responding, and might have gone downstairs to set up an ambush position on the officers. So when the officers enter the building and they don't hear any gunfire, they began searching the building. Once they hear gunfire, they stop their search and I forget the actual term for it. I haven't had this training in a couple years. I'm having it again in like 2 weeks, so forgive me. But they stop their search and they go straight towards the threat. And that's the part that we're going to see here. So without further ado, this is the final 40 seconds of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department responding to this active shooter.
I think it's upstairs. It sounds like it's upstairs. Go. Push the LPV up. Push the LPV up. Reloading.
All right, I put some spacers in my video so that I would remember what to talk about, but see how efficient this is, how quickly the officers moved. They found the suspect. The suspect is right here at the end of this gun barrel. It's really hard to see, and when I was watching this, I couldn't tell if the suspect was still looking out the window, if the suspect had turned towards the officers. It's really difficult to see, but as far as responding to an active shooter situation, this is the best case scenario for the officers. You go down a long hallway, it opens up at the end. When you're in a big, scary open area, the suspect just happens to be in the middle of it and is an easy target, easy for you to take out. They weren't in one of these side rooms setting up in an ambush position. This is the best case scenario when you're responding to this kind of thing. Right there is the suspect. I think she was still looking out the window when they turned that corner. So here we have kind of the opposite extreme. Now this person was not setting up in an ambush position, but things did not go as planned when the officers arrived. And the way the officers are going to be judged, and the way all officers are going to be judged, is not just how you respond, but how you respond when you run into something that wasn't part of your training, or you run into the least bit of adversity. That is where your job gets hard. That's where you make your money. So when it comes down to the Uvalde situation, the suspect entered the building at 11:33 a.m. Officers arrived on scene at 11:35 a.m., which was 2 minutes later. They arrived down at the classroom within 1 minute. So their response, if you're comparing it to Nashville, their response was actually faster than what the officers in Nashville responded to. They were down at the door to the classroom at 11:36 a.m. At 11:36 and 58 seconds is when the suspect began firing at them through the door. Here is that response. Here's something that I want to point out about the response in Uvalde that was different than the response in Nashville. And this also shows that they're not necessarily doing what they were trained to do. They arrived at the door. There was gunfire going on right before they got at the door. Then they paused at the door and they waited for almost 1 minute. They waited 50 some seconds. I'm going to start playing it again in a moment. You're going to see when they began taking fire. The reason we train active shooter response the way we do is that you get in the building as quick as possible. You go to the sound of the gunfire. And if you hear gunfire coming from a room, you enter that room, you engage the suspect while hopefully they are engaged with somebody else. You don't want to give them time to react to your presence because that makes it nearly impossible to enter that room. If somebody's standing in a corner with either a pistol or an AR or whatever they have, a shotgun, and they're focused on the door and you're coming through that door, one or two or potentially even more of you are going to get seriously wounded while you're trying to make that entry. If you enter that room while the gunman is engaged with other people who are already in that room, you have the highest opportunity of success of taking them out quickly without injuring any of the first responders, because your goal is to take care of this situation without creating any more casualties. So that was the first mistake that these officers did. Is they arrived on scene. There was gunfire going on behind that door. They didn't enter the room while the guy was already engaged. You have to use that to your advantage. I believe I cut this off in just a moment, but here's why you see, this is why we're trained that way. The officers waited outside that door for too long. They waited outside that room too long. These walls here, I believe, are just regular framed walls and they're drywall. So the suspect was inside that room. He knew there were police officers outside that room. He began shooting through the wall with a high-powered rifle, and the officers were at that point left with what they believed no option other than to retreat. I've been on record before that I would say retreating in that situation is not the worst thing in the world, but the worst thing in the world that you can do is not re-engage in a timely manner. We all know that's what happened in Uvalde. Besides not checking the door handle and all the other stuff, there was two major mistakes that they made. The first one is they didn't enter the room immediately when they got there. They gave the suspect the opportunity to barricade himself and turn and face the door so that they would now be the victims if they entered that room. And then they didn't quickly come up with a plan to re-engage the suspect. As a police officer, you have to be thinking about these kinds of contingencies when you're entering a building, because it's not going to be every time the same way it was in Nashville, when you walk down a hall and the suspect's standing there with his back to you shooting out of a window, and then you can kill them. You're going to have situations like this where you're caught in an OODA loop and you have to decide, okay, how I'm going to do this. And I need to think right now, there's a bomb that's going off. It's like tick, 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 tick. I need to make something happen right now. I can't dilly-dally. The next one is this one in Columbus, Ohio. And here's something I want to point out about this particular active shooter response. For one, I apologize for kind of naming it an active shooter response. It's technically true, but it was moderately deceiving because the suspect was locked out of the bar and he fired a couple rounds into the bar. Officers arrived on scene. They know that the suspect is outside, but they don't know where he is. So they parked a safe distance away from the bar. They try walking up and they immediately start taking fire from the suspect. So at that point, they have confirmed the suspect is outside. He is already engaged with them, which means he's not engaged with anybody else. And they have to try to determine where he is.
Yep. I'm on the right side of the cruiser rear. Okay. I'm gonna move up to the rear of the...
So that's a situation where the officers arrived on scene. They did not have the element of surprise from the moment they entered that parking lot. This guy was probably outside waiting on them, trying to ambush them because he knew that police officers were going to be arriving on scene. When they exited their cars and started walking towards him, he started shooting. He started firing on them. They retreated back behind their vehicle. And then, I don't know, it didn't seem like very long, 10, 15 seconds. They tried to make that push again towards the suspect. The problem was he knew exactly where they were because they were in the middle of a big, well-lit parking lot. They didn't know where he was. They were unable to return fire in that situation. One thing I do want to point out, there was some criticism of the officers for using their flashlights. When you're a police officer and you work at night, you often use your flashlight to blind the people who are looking at you. It does not necessarily give away your position the way you think it does if you're able to shine it in the right spot. So I'm pretty sure that was their intent with using their flashlights in that situation. But here is the angle where you actually do get the shooting. And just like in Nashville, I'm going to cut the video immediately before the shooting occurs. But I went through the numbers on Nashville and Uvalde. I'm going to go through the numbers here. The officers, so what you're going to see is there was about 1 minute prior to this that you're going to see that I edited out. The officers were on scene, and this video begins right where one of the officers is saying, hey, we need to move up. So they've been on scene for approximately 1 minute, and they're already talking about each other like, hey, we need to move up. About a minute and 25 seconds later is when the guy starts to walk out from behind his vehicle. So the officers were on scene for a total of 2 minutes and 25 seconds.
We're gonna have to move up.
Okay.
He's in the car.
FAC, where should the responding officers respond to? Just out front?
This dude's probably about to die tonight, isn't he? What's that? That dude's probably about to die tonight.
Stay behind the car, man.
Very possibly.
614 advised. He's in between cars in the parking lot. We really don't have eyes on him. He's outside of the bar. We got the parking lot pretty much surrounded on all sides.
So pay attention to what the officers are saying on the radio there. Remember, there's a cruiser kind of off to the left side of our screen here. Those guys are looking at this black car on the other side of this white van. They think that is where the suspect is because they were told he's by a black vehicle. The officers that just arrived, they see a black vehicle here. They see a black vehicle here. The suspect could be in any one of these locations, and if you go charging into the wrong location, you are walking yourself into an ambush with a suspect who we've already shown is already shooting at police officers, already knows where you're at. If you don't see him and he sees you, that is not the situation that you're going to be walking into. Remember too, this is an active shooter, but he's actively shooting at you. He's not actively shooting at somebody else.
If you're able to pull him at a fitness center, that's probably safest. Copy, me deploying by the fitness center.
car, do you have eyes on the logging our view?
I said 10 or the other car by the billboard. Can you see anything? I can't tell a single car or outside of it. Yeah.
He's coming out.
Put your hands up!
So there we saw that. The officers took a position of cover. They were trying to determine how to get in. They were talking amongst themselves about where the suspect actually was, knowing that he was literally firing at them. He then walked out, pointed a gun at them, and they did what they had to do. We're going to watch the Nashville scenario one more time, and I want you to watch this and think in your mind, look, this is absolutely the perfect response when all of the stars align. But when you consider comparing it to everybody else's response, remember that in this one, the suspect did exactly what you expect the suspect to do. You have to be prepared to respond to these things and be prepared for the event that the suspect does not do what you expect him to do. That when you turn that corner, he's not going to be standing out in the open. Or that when you go down that hallway, he's going to be behind a door and he's going to be firing through that door. Or when you arrive in that parking lot and you know the suspect is in a black vehicle, you don't know which vehicle he is at. He already sees you and he's shooting at you the moment you get out of your vehicle. These are the situations that are not perfect situations, and you have to think through in your mind how you're going to approach those situations. And they are all very individually dependent, which means that you have to take note of your surroundings in a very short period of time, develop a plan, and act on that plan when things don't go exactly the way they went here in Nashville.
It's upstairs. It sounds like it's upstairs. Go. Push an LPV up. Push an LPV up. Reloading.
And there we have it. All I can say is thank God that the kids got out of this school and that the gunman was focused on the police officers when they responded. The officers with the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department did a fantastic job. They showed that they were well trained. They showed that they know their training, and they responded very well to their training. They did exactly what they were supposed to do according to their training, and this went fantastic for them. Just keep in mind that it's not always going to be that case. The public needs to understand that it's not always going to go exactly perfect like this. And officers need to understand it's not going to go perfect like this. And you need to be prepared to make another decision when you encounter something that isn't absolutely perfect. I think that's all I'm going to say today. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you later.